Thank you all for joining us. Ira Jackson is my name. I have the privilege of serving as Dean of the John W. McCormick Graduate School of Policy and Global Studies here at the University of Massachusetts. And on behalf of all of us at UMass Boston and the Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, which is housed within the McCormick Graduate School, and our co-sponsors, the Trotter Institute here at the University of Massachusetts Boston, welcome to Boston's only public university, and a place that I hope for those of you who haven't been here before, you'll consider a home away from home, especially on issues related to social justice and women in politics and public policy. We aim to be activists, and we have been, I'm proud to say, for more than 40 years. I think some of you are aware that Betty Tamor began the program for women, politics, and public policy first at, was it Simmons or Boston College? And it migrated here to UMass Boston some 20 years ago, and some 700 women have graduated from our certificate program for women, politics, and public policy, forming a very strong alumni association, which we hope to strengthen as the years go forward, so that we can have many more discussions like the one tonight, but where we are not only talking about women running for office and women advising mayors, but talking about women who are mayors. And we're inspired by the lineup in New Hampshire, where Maggie Hassan is the governor of the state, and Kelly Ayotte is the United States Senator from the state, and Jean Shaheen is the senator from the state, and two other women are congresswomen from the state. And we hope to emulate more of that here in Massachusetts. Under the leadership of Ann Bookman, the new director of our Center for Women and Public Politics, Women in Politics and Public Policy, we aim to do just that. I know we're eager to hear from Charlotte and Marjorie and others. Let me first acknowledge, because we celebrate women who have the courage to run for public office, a number of candidates and former elected officials who are with us, so forgive me, but I just stepped off a plane from Kaduna, Nigeria, and if I can read the handwriting in front of me, I'll acknowledge, please, Carol Donovan, a former state rep from Woburn, and Alicia Gardner, a chair of the Quincy Democratic City Committee and a former city councilwoman. Alicia, you here? Okay, great, glad you're here. Patrice Gattosi, forgive me if I mispronounced your name, former candidate for Boston City Council District Number 5. Patrice, you here? Yes. Okay, great. And Sheila Lyons, Barnstable County Commissioner, welcome. Welcome back. Suzanne Lee, former candidate for Boston City Council District 2. All right. Catherine O'Neill, was a candidate for the Boston City Council at large. Also in attendance, Dylan Hare, candidate for State Senate. Are you here? Yeah, there you are. And Mimi Turchinets was a candidate for Boston City Council District Number 5. Thank you. Congratulations for the courage all of you have demonstrated in standing up. I want you to know that under Ann's leadership, the center is going to be, as I mentioned before, an even more vigorous, we're going to reclaim the vigor that we demonstrated, that Betty Tamor and Elizabeth Sherman demonstrated many years ago in being pioneers on this issue. And just today, Ann and the staff at the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy issued a Women's Political Leadership in Boston inventory and survey. I hope you'll use it as a helpful guide and look to us for many more such insightful contributions going forward. I think you're all aware that the center has not only our certificate program, but conducts applied research and teaching, and we will be hosting many more of these forums. So don't be strangers, and without further ado, let me introduce to you the very dynamic new director of the Center for Women, Politics, and Public Policy, Dr. Ann Bookman.
How's everybody? So, thank you very much, Dean Jackson. We're very glad that you came back safely from Nigeria. So I want to welcome everybody. We're extremely pleased to have such a good turnout for this event, which I think promises to be a very thought-provoking and stimulating discussion. I want to begin by just thanking Barbara Lewis, my colleague at the Trotter Institute, for co-hosting this event with us. And I want to thank the organizations that are co-sponsors of the evening, and you'll find their names listed on the front of the program. I also want to recognize several groups of people who are here and participate in and contribute to the work of the center. If you are in one of these groups, just raise your hand. We're not going to do any applause, but members of our External Advisory Board, just raise your hands. Members of the Polly Logan Committee, great. And alumni and current students of our graduate certificate program. We've got our whole cohort here from our current program. We're very proud of them. So I would ask you now to silence any electronic devices you have that ring or beep or buzz. However, we do invite you to tweet, since we are tweeting tonight. And we'd appreciate it if you could follow us or retweet. Our hashtag is listed on the back page of the program. So I just want to say a few words of introduction about why Barbara and I decided to organize this event. It's no secret that women, particularly women of color, are very underrepresented in electoral office in the city of Boston, in the state legislature, and in other senior appointed positions. And at the Center for Women in Politics, we feel this status quo is simply unacceptable. So the CWPP, the Center for Women in Politics, has been working for years on a number of, with many different groups on these issues. Our most recent collaboration that I wanted to bring your attention to is with the Women's Pipeline for Change. And together with them, we produced Pathways to Political Leadership for Women of Color. This project has produced a wonderful new website, and I hope that you will pick up this card at the front table. It has the web address, and you can check out some terrific new resources that are available, very moving videos, all about the political leadership of women of color. The focus of discussion this evening is the situation of women's political leadership in the city of Boston. In the race for Boston's new mayor, as we know, there were a great diversity of candidates in the preliminary, but, as we all know, not in the election. And so we're going to try to explore some questions, such as, has this changed landscape, that is, with having a lot of diversity in the preliminary, actually changed opportunities for women or not? As we know, there was only one woman candidate for mayor. So the question is, how can we encourage other women to run for public office? What can we do to open doors for more women to seek elective office? In order to discuss these critical questions, we have asked a thoughtful and politically experienced group of women and men to help us think through the issues involved. So here's how we're going to proceed this evening. First, we're going to hear from Charlotte Golar Richie, former mayoral candidate, who will speak first. She will discuss her campaign and address these broader questions. And I just want to say, Charlotte, that we don't measure success only by numbers of votes counted. We found your campaign inspiring. People all across the city did. Your vision for Boston, I think, is still alive, so thank you. After Charlotte speaks, we are then going to have a distinguished panel of speakers who all have in-depth experience working on these issues and will give their perspective on the future of women's political leadership in Boston. I also just want to recognize Senator Linda Dorsina Forey has just joined us. She represents our district here at UMass Boston, so we're very proud to have our own senator here. So it's now a great pleasure for me to introduce Marjorie Egan, who will be our moderator for the evening. Marjorie, who is well known to many of you as a columnist for the Boston Herald, has a long and distinguished career in journalism. Marjorie grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts, and graduated from Stanford University. She has worked for a number of newspapers over the years, including the Fall River Herald News, the Standard Times of New Bedford, the Boston Globe, and Boston Magazine. For 26 years, Marjorie has written a column for the Boston Herald, which I'm sure many of us have read. And for the last 14 years, she has co-hosted news programs on television and radio with Jim Braude. And they are now on WGBH Radio from noon to 2 on weekdays, just in case you want to tune in. So please join me in welcoming Marjorie Egan.
Boy, it's always tough to hear that. Written a column for 26 years for the Boston Herald. My God, how did this happen so quickly? Anyway, I wanted to thank you very much for inviting me tonight. It's a pleasure to be here in this absolutely gorgeous building. Every time I come here, I think, boy, the view outside these windows is spectacular. I'm thrilled to be here because since I have been writing a column for 26 years for the Boston Herald, and I've been around for a long time, I think I've probably said 100 times if I said it once. It's so odd in Massachusetts. Here we are, you know, we're always talking the talk, but we're never quite walking the walk. You know, we're all big progressives, we're all big Democrats, or most of us anyway. And, you know, where are all these women? Where are all these women of color? A few years ago, Arizona, like home of like the Tea Party and the anti-immigration thing, the constitutional officers, nearly all of them were women, and they were Republicans. I mean, you say, okay, they're doing it in Arizona, and back here in Massachusetts, I mean, you look at the number of women we've elected statewide, it's almost non-existent over the years. So I don't know what it is. I don't know if it's, I really don't know what it is. And maybe some of you guys have ideas tonight in the panel about what it is about Massachusetts, big progressive Democrats that most people are in the state. Well, independents technically, but most people vote for Democrats. But I do think it's a little bit encouraging. I mean, Charlotte Golar Richie, I covered her race, and we can talk about this with the panel. She did finish third, but she started really late compared to John Conley, who we know was preparing as a city councilor for quite some time to run for mayor. Marty Walsh, we now know, was preparing for quite some time for the possibility that Tom Menino would leave. So these guys started really early, and they had a lot of money, which is the mother's milk of politics, as we know. So we'll talk about whether this was about money, whether this is about starting, whether it was about because Charlotte's a woman, whether because she was a woman of color. But there are some encouraging things. Obviously, we've got Elizabeth Warren in the Senate. That's sort of exciting, a big breakthrough in Massachusetts. We've got 2 women running for governor. Martha Coakley, one of the few women who has been elected statewide as Attorney General. She's running for governor. Juliette Kayyem is running for governor. Suzanne Bump, the auditor, she's won statewide. In the city council in Boston, 2 really exciting developments. 2 women of color. Michelle Wu's 28 years old. She's unbelievably dynamic. I had a chance to interview her. You think she's 28. I mean, it's unbelievable. And she's taken care of her younger siblings because their mothers had health problems. She's really impressive. Ayanna Pressley, second, maybe the second, is it the third time that you would know? Second time, okay. Third time topped the ticket, sorry. Third time topped the ticket or second time topped the ticket? Second time topped the ticket. And she's been a star on the city councilor. And of course, Senator Dorsina Ford that was just mentioned, kingmaker in the Marty Walsh race, got a lot of votes for Marty Walsh, I think, and Charlotte did. So anyway, we'll talk about, and not in her neighborhood as I had on these notes, but not only in Boston, but I think we can credit Charlotte for getting votes all across New England for Marty Walsh in the Senate race. So I want to introduce Charlotte Golar Richie. You know, she, of course, ran for mayor, and when people talked about her long and distinguished resume, it is a long and distinguished resume. She is right now the co-chair of Mayor-elect Marty Walsh's transition team. In her 5-month campaign, she finished in 3rd place in the preliminary election, garnering nearly 16,000 votes, 14% in a 12-person race, which was, I thought, pretty impressive. Strong background in federal and state advocacy, youth education and job training, housing and community development, a respected record of commitment to public service and political activism. And this is just some of this extensive and a very impressive resume we talked about during the campaign. Senior Vice President for Public Policy, Advocacy, and Government Relations for Youth Build USA, a fantastic program. She was a state representative for Dorchester and Roxbury's 5th Suffolk District. She worked with Governor Deval Patrick as a senior advisor for federal, state, and community affairs. She was the Chief of Housing and Director of the Department of Neighborhood Development for Thomas Menino. She served in his cabinet, and she has opened doors to many, many women in politics, advocated for support for Haiti, and worked for stronger, safer community relations. I'm thrilled to introduce Charlotte Golar Richie.
Thank you, Marjorie. Thanks, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. I'm thrilled to be here. I've been thinking about this ever since I talked to Dr. Barbara Lewis and Dr. Ann Bookman, and they had the vision and leadership and courage and chutzpah and all that stuff to say that we need to do this. We need to memorialize this experience and all. And I really do appreciate you pushing forward on this. And I've worked with, Dean Ira Jackson when he was a banker here in the city, a civic leader in our city, and still is. But it's just nice to reconnect with you all. And Krista Kelleher, who held down the fort at the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy, and is a terrific person. And I'm sure Krista and Carol Donovan and Marie Turley and everybody who's on the Center's External Advisory Board, Joyce and I would all agree that Ann is a terrific addition. Digna Scott, I also want to acknowledge, my friend, who's chaired the board too for a long time. So many people. So let's see, I have a prescribed time period to kind of share so much, and there's, I did a lot of public speaking during the campaign, Marjorie, but talking to this group, it was a little bit nerve-wracking because where do you start? Where do you start? How do you capture the experience? In fact, it's almost like a blur. I can't believe that it was a 5-month campaign, that 7 months have gone by. It's just quite remarkable. It was, I guess, the end of March rather, March 21st, around that time, that Mayor Tom Menino decided that he would not seek re-election. I guess some people knew, but I didn't know. So it caught me by surprise. But here we are, right? And the question Marjorie mentioned is timing, and Charlotte got in late. And I did think about that because I did have my own personal process that I had to follow before I jumped in there. And the question was, should I do that? Or should I forego doing that? Or should I maybe not run? And I decided that the biggest regret I would have would be to not run at all, right? And so I jumped out there, and while it was a little later than the others, because they had been two candidates had been out there earlier. A lot of people jumped out there. I was the last, one of the last, with a field of 24, can you believe that, who jumped out there initially. But let's see, there are a couple of, I want to acknowledge, before I get into my remarks, that I do want to acknowledge a couple of people in addition to who I've acknowledged already, and clearly I'm happy to be on the panel with Marjorie and Joyce Fariabo, who worked on my campaign, and Paul Watanabe and Preeti Rao and Gloria Belmotta. We're going to have fun on this panel. But I also want to acknowledge the district, the candidates for district council. And Suzanne Lee, I wish Suzanne had won. She ran, and I wish she had won. And yeah, I think a lot of us, and that's not to take anything away from her opponent, who I actually was able to work for and work with, work at the city. So I don't, sort of when we have women running, it means that the guys don't get to win, right? And it's a little bit, okay, well, I think that Suzanne would have been, and is a remarkable leader, and would have been a wonderful leader. And at some point we have to say We need to give the women a chance, everybody, okay? And all of us, men and women, have to stand up and say, Suzanne would be terrific, and let's support her. And it's not just Suzanne, it's also Mimi Turchinets, who came in third in her race. And Mimi, are you here? Okay, good, good. You know, there's a light in my eye, so it's hard to even see who's in the audience. I know I can kind of feel the vibe that there are a lot of friends and supporters, people who got me where Catherine O'Neill, who came in, I think, fourth in that race, maybe. Ninth, sorry, okay, ninth. In the at-large race, sorry, in the at-large race. We didn't acknowledge you, Catherine, but I'm gonna acknowledge you because, Catherine, you did a great job. So I'm happy about that, and of course I see Senator Forey is here, Senator Linda Dorsina Forey is here. Okay, so I wanted to acknowledge my sisters here because part of this effort, I think, Ann and Barbara, is also about networking, right? And getting to know one another. How do we support each other? And so that means that we probably need to do a better job of getting to know each other so that we can step up when the opportunity arises. So I have a lot of respect for everybody who put their hat in the ring, and I have no regrets that I did it. For people who supported me here in the audience, and I know that many of you did, I just have to say thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I couldn't have done it without you. I came in third after getting in late, after having not a whole lot of money, being outmatched, probably 3-to-1 by the top candidates. Half of the field were after the field got weeded out, and we had 12 candidates in total. Half of them were sitting elected officials who had, you know, campaign apparatus, war chest, all that stuff. And I made it third place, 15,500 votes, 14% of the vote, because of you. And yes, because we had a message, and because we were able to mobilize and really turn on, I think, the electorate enough so that they did come out and they didn't get turned off. There were things to turn them off, but we did it. So you all were part of that, and I just want to really thank you from the bottom of my heart. Now, for those of you who you know, perhaps weren't able to get around to supporting me in a public way the way you wanted to, I want to thank you for your underground campaigning and sending good vibes my way, right? Because we accept that as well. So Barbara and Ann, this is a terrific program, and so I'm going to jump right in now in terms of what I want to say, because I got very precise instructions. I'm going to talk about my experience as a candidate for mayor here in the city of Boston, share a few lessons from the campaign trail, and explore maybe a few opportunities for encouraging and preparing women for public office. So my experience, of course, is that I did jump out there. I will say when Mayor Menino decided that he wasn't going to run, I was in the high desert in California, in LA County, there at a site visit at a youth build program where I was going to try to convince a staunch Republican leader in the House of Representatives that he should fund the the youth bill program, the federal youth bill program, which is embedded in federal law and gets a federal appropriation. And all of a sudden my cell phone started to, blow up, with text messages and things like, "Are you gonna run? Did you hear?" I didn't know what was going on, right? And that's how I heard that the mayor wasn't going to do this. So then I flew back home, and then a lot of folks, women in particular, who had been telling me for maybe close to 20 years, "Charlotte, you should run, you're gonna be the next mayor," all of this, then started to say, "Okay, what are we doing?" But you know what? It was 20 years ago that I had served in the House of Representatives, and a lot can happen at that period of time, right? And my children who were young then, now grown up, my husband and I had just met with a financial planner to figure out when he could retire. So we were thinking about other things. My dad was ailing. I lost my mom, lost my mother-in-law. I had my father-in-law, my father both had chronic illnesses, and so I wasn't sure if I could pull it all together. And I knew that a lot of people might not remember my contributions. And so, while you hear my resume and all of that, and that should have at least taken away any issue about Charlotte's qualifications, the personal connection to the work that I did may have somehow evaporated a little bit for a lot of people. So it made it, a bit of a challenge. If it had been 7 years ago, for example, when I was working for the mayor, the year that I left probably to go work for the governor, I think it was about that time, I think it would have perhaps been more of a, I can't say a piece of cake, but it would have been an easier prospect. So now I had to really do some soul searching. And again, I know that the guys are better at this. They just say, I'm in. And maybe that's a lesson learned. But for me, I had to make sure, for example, that if my father is ailing, that my sister was going to be there to be able to look after him. If, I've been celebrating my 29th wedding anniversary next week, and I kind of felt like I wanted to be married another 29 years if I could do that. So I don't think I could just jump in without saying, hey, Winston, what do we think about this, right? Okay, so you get that, and that's why it did take some time to do this. But I did, so they couldn't, the criticism about me might be that I got in late, and that's certainly true, and but it wouldn't be about my qualifications. So now what could it be about? It would be about that Charlotte has no money, right? So that was probably a true statement, but I was gonna get some money, and the goal was gonna be to seriously raise some money. Question around message, that was an interesting one. Why is Charlotte running? And I did talk a lot about why I was running, why I wanted to run. I said I love this city. I said Boston's a great city. I talked about the tale of two cities. I talked about the need to try to unite our city, to make it a place where we all feel as one, and that there's a common vision for the city and a common goal to kind of to deal with the problems that we faced as a city, whether it was gun violence or poverty or homelessness or whatever. I talked about the fact that we are a world-class city, but on this, when I talked about the tale of two cities, I was reminded, and I tried to remind others about this divide along income and ethnic and other lines, and that race and gender, national origin, language spoken at home are often the determinants of socioeconomic status and where, in terms of where someone resides in the city. And then when I referred to the divide as the tale, in terms of the tale of two cities, I talked about the feature that is very prominent in people's minds when they talk about Boston, about the haves and the privileged, places where the crime is low. And we heard that on the campaign trail. Bill Walczak will remember that, and I'm happy he's here because in some places crime isn't so low, right? The economy is stable and growing, and educational opportunity abounds. But it is that other storyline that drove me to want to run for mayor. It wasn't just sort of ambition alone, right? I mean, I guess I must be a little bit ambitious to want to do it, but it really wasn't that. It was out of public service and wanting to make a better world and wanting to address the gun violence, which is too often feels like a common occurrence in so many places where working people find themselves and their families homeless. So they have a job, but they're still homeless, where we've got quality schools in some areas, but too many underperforming schools in neighborhoods around the city. So those are the things, some of the things that I did talk about, and it resonated, this message resonated with some, maybe didn't resonate with others, but again, more time, more money, and a chance to get to more people would have been probably the thing that would have helped our effort. You may recall, I guess during the campaign, there was a lot talked about me being the only woman in the race. And the fact that women, we need to open the doors for women and do more to shatter the glass ceiling. And that women, and I think this is one that is a lesson learned, and I do want to share a bunch of lessons, but the fact is that getting into this race, I may have expected more support, perhaps, from women and from people of color, being excited about the fact that I was in there, and that was something that was an assumption, and the saying about assuming, that I probably have learned from. But moving on with the race, I'll tell you, just sprinting through, I did what I needed to do to get on the ballot. There were 11 candidates in June. When I was certified to be on the ballot, I had to file nomination papers, doubled the number of signatures I had to get in. And, you know, I think the seasoned Pauls were surprised, and I think Joyce remembers, folks said you must have paid people to get the signatures, right? Because it couldn't have been that we did it on our own. But we got those signatures in. June saw a lot of good things happen, actually, even just before June, with Preeti Rao from the Mass Women's Political Caucus signing on and helping with our campaign. That was really, really exciting. Then I saw a group of people coalesce around my candidacy. This was very unexpected. So while I had expectations about certain folks coming on board, I was totally surprised by the fact that State Rep Mike Moran from Austin-Brighton said, Charlotte, I'm going to sign on to this campaign because I think you're going to win this thing. You'd be a great leader. And then his friend Aaron Michaelwitz, who's a state rep from the South End. I'd known Aaron. We were at a Suffolk MBA school together, and both of us getting our MBA in the class and sharing notes and things like that. Nice guy. Never expected that years down the road he would say, Charlotte, I want to support you. I'm going to endorse you for mayor of Boston. He represented South End, North End, Chinatown. Gloria Fox, a reliable ally from Roxbury, she jumped on board very early. And then Pablo Calderon, who's a friend, I've known him a long time, he's the chair of the Latino Political Task Force. It was a little difficult for him to come on board, a lot of pressure for him to support the only Latino candidate in the field, Felix Arroyo. But he said, Charlotte, hey, you are the most qualified, I'm gonna be with you. And then there was just a wonderful group of folks in Charlestown. Now, 20 years ago, would I have imagined that there was this, well, sort of totally politically connected family in Charlestown that would be saying, we're going to campaign for Charlotte. And that was the Callahans, Ed and Dennis and Melody and their family. It was just amazing. That told me that my anticipated base of support embedded in Dorchester and Roxbury, my old state rep district, was not the only place I could look to harvest votes. I mean, it was just my support extended beyond those borders, and that was really, really exciting. There were a lot of tests in the campaign, as campaigns do present themselves with a lot of tests, raising the money, right, recruiting the volunteers, honing a stump speech, staying on time at the debates, which I was awful at, I have to say that, right? 14-hour days, all of that stuff. But in July, we were, I think, hitting our stride. That was a good month and might have been my favorite month of the campaign for a lot of reasons. One is I sort of showed myself something I wondered about. I'm 54 years old and proud of it, but I wasn't sure about things like stamina and energy level and all of that stuff. Well, I'm going to just say I know that I kept up with the youngest of the bunch there. And how was that? How did that play out? Krista will remember this too. Parades. There are a lot of parades in campaigns for mayor. I mean, there's the Bunker Hill Day Parade, the Puerto Rican Day Parade, the Caribbean Day Parade, the Dominican Day. I mean, it was just parades for days. And then you're, walking up, there was, hot sun beating down on you, and, you're going side to side trying to greet the spectators and all of that, and, kind of people want to talk to you and so on. I have to just say that I was sprinting through this thing, and I know I can credit a little yoga and a little Zumba for all of that. So I think people were like, well, even my daughter, who campaigned with me for much of the time, was like, Mom, you're doing a dang thing. That means that I was really doing real well on the campaign trail. Okay. So that was really good. That was a wonderful month for me, July. I think we're on an upswing. We had, just so many things. I think that might have been around the time that you all heard Mayor Menino, I think, said something about Charlotte will make history if she's elected. And I think Governor Patrick said something like, I think the city is ready for a person of color, so they floated that stuff. And then I got in the right place at the right time with President Obama when he was in town, so I got my picture taken. But one of the highlights was just a campaign rally at Hibernian Hall. We had hundreds and hundreds of people, and I'm happy that the fire marshal didn't stop by because he would have really shut us down in that one. That was a beautiful, wonderful event. It was amazing. It felt like a national political convention, and then we did a trolley tour around the city, opened up 5 offices and neighborhoods around the city. Things were great. I guess I have to say my favorite highlight was being interviewed by Ira Jackson on WUMB. I can't forget that, right? I didn't forget. But if July was my favorite month, August was probably the opposite, because for me, sadly, on August 11th, I lost my dad right in the middle of the campaign. And that was not expected, right? The things we least expect. But with the help of my family and friends, I was able to regroup, and the memory of his career in public service definitely was a source of inspiration and spurred me on. After I laid my dad to rest, I got back on the campaign trail. There were a lot of people depending on me. I was not going to let folks down. And in some ways, it was a diversion too, and I was able to really focus on the campaign interests. Surprisingly, I was able to move ahead, and we continued to attract new supporters, raise money, received national attention with the endorsements of Emily's List and Gloria Steinem and actor Lou Gossett. And I had an interview on MSNBC that got some notice. So we were hitting in cruise control. And then after Labor Day, that's when the campaign shifted into high gear. And a lot happened. There was a stream of candidates forums, several church visits, Sundays, not just one church visit, a barrage of press attention, standouts, everything, the whole gamut of things in terms of this campaign. And as we rounded the curve on the final lap of the mayoral marathon, 1 or 2 polls had me neck and neck with the top 3 men in the race. And we almost fell out of our chairs. We couldn't believe it because we were inching up. We were just making our way up for 7%, 8%. Now we are at the top of the heap with DA Dan Connolly, City Councilor John Connolly, and with Marty Walsh, now Mayor-elect Marty Walsh. So what would happen then? We really felt we could get one of those 2 spots. And that brings me to the press. So I would say overall, the press was pretty fair. However, 4 days before the election, a surprisingly critical article appeared. Now, did it influence the election outcome? We'll never know. I have to leave that to you all to decide. But I'll just say that I never anticipated that my most favorable press coverage would be from the Boston Herald. I'm sure Marjorie Egan had something to do with that. I'm going to renew my subscription. Okay, so with just remaining time, I'll just share a few lessons and opportunities, and we'll get into the panel because that's what everybody's waiting for. But I'll just say, so maybe the first lesson is you do want to know what you're getting into before you get into it, right? And you want to understand how, in my case, the stakes were very, very high. I probably didn't pay enough attention to that. Looking back, if I realized, I was a little bit, a little complacent or comfortable being here in Boston, feeling this is my home, this is where I raised my children, this is where I've had my career as an adult and, homeowner, all of that stuff, have served the city, worked in the city. So I felt that I'm known here and that I would be treated in a certain way, and that was all thrown out the window, right? The stakes are high. Women, the stakes are high, and women of color, even higher. When you talk nationally speaking, 100 largest American cities, there is only one African-American woman mayor in office, okay? And that's in Baltimore, Maryland, just one. So, just thinking about that, you have to gear up for what that means, right? Lesson 2, you want to do it and you want to get in there fast. So start planning ahead. And I probably, I've learned from that. Jumping into the race can feel like ripping off a Band-Aid, a hairy arm, right? Or jumping into, a polar bear swim in the lake, or in the cold lake on an icy day. I don't know what you want to liken it to, but it's uncomfortable. That's the point. So then, you know what? Suck it up and make it happen, okay? and make it happen. Okay. So I've learned that's a lesson there. And hopefully family will love you regardless. Another lesson, as a country and a society, we have come far, made huge strides in terms of how we treat women, women candidates, candidates of color. But the isms are still alive and well. And that sort of racism, sexism thing can rear its ugly head. And there's even that misogyny thing that can also appear. And so I got a little taste of that on the campaign. I think the possibility of being elected the next mayor triggered negativity from unexpected places. And when I became the subject of repeated criticism on a local radio show, I just honestly, it caught me off guard. And it probably confused the listeners, it confused some of the voters out there, it confused me, especially since I knew the people who owned the radio station. So I was kind of, and we had a good working relationship. So that one was a problem. And when you confuse the electorate, guess what happens? It suppresses the vote. It makes people just sort of say, I've had the heck with this, I'm staying home. So they're done with that. I think, other lessons, you want to try to connect with the people. You don't want to let the campaign drive you, you want to drive the campaign. I think another lesson is that women, you have to think about taking care of yourself. And that we can talk about that more. But if you want to be in these parades, if you want to work these 14-hour days, if you want to keep the stress down and not get crazy and not let the stuff get to you, you just have to find a way to go to the gym or do something, and that's hard to do when you're running. I think opportunities for women to be in public office, it's the Center for Women in Politics and Public Policy that will help with that. It's the Pipeline for Women for Change, and they're celebrating a big event tomorrow night. I hope we all go to that. It's the Mass Women's Political Caucus. We need systems of support. We need to find ways for women to be able to go somewhere and get taken care of. The Pipeline for Change, for example, there were 5 women who came through that class, that first class. I think 4 of them campaigned for me. The Mass Women's Political Caucus, which endorsed me every time I ran for office in 1994, 1996, 1998, they were there, the first organization to endorse me. Not just to endorse me in terms of putting out a press release. Preeti and Gail and Pat and other people in the caucus were there basically helping with resources, information, guidance, and just encouraging words. It was just terrific. I don't know what I would have done without them. That's the kind of thing that women need. We are charting new territory. We're like explorers out there. We need to have people who are going to come and bring a compass and show us how to do this. Other things we'll talk on the panel, but I'm just going to say, just in conclusion, that I am just grateful for having had the opportunity to do this. And I will always have a very positive view overall about this experience, and I will support other women in wanting to run for office, as I feel that I have. I think we need to mentor. I think that every elected official needs to mentor someone, and that's the guys as well. And in the end, I lost, but I didn't go away. And I will not go away. And while I thought I had a lot to offer, I was able to get out there, not sit on the sidelines, support a candidate for mayor, and guess what? He won. And he had a woman campaign manager. I'm sure that had something to do with it. Thank you, everyone. I know we want to hear the panel. Thank you.
Love that plug for the Boston Herald. We don't hear that many of those these days, so that was great. Anyway, I want to introduce our panel. There's longer biographies of everyone in the program, but we're going to I'll give their introduction short and sweet. Joyce Faribault, media and political strategist and on the board of Women's Pipeline for Change, and also Joyce has been so helpful to me reporting over the years. Great to see you. Why don't you come on up and take a seat? Preeti Rao, you heard Charlotte mention her over and over again. She is executive director of the Massachusetts Women's Political Caucus. Laura Bell Mota, lead organizer, Neighbors United for a Better East Boston. and Paul Watanabe, Professor of Political Science and Director of the Institute of Asian American Studies at UMass Boston. So wait till everybody sits down. We're starting a little bit later. You want me to go for a half hour and then do the questions? Okay, all right, that's what we'll do. So, I thought we'd just start with the big question, which is, Charlotte did well, not enough to win, not enough to beat Marty Walsh and John Connolly into the final. And feel free to jump in, any of you guys, if you want to talk about this. How much of this was about her being a woman and being a woman of color? What do you think? You want to start, Charlotte?
Well, I've done a lot of talking. Let's hear from the other ladies.
Okay.
Well,
Joyce?
Well, no, I think being a woman in this race was new and different. I'm sorry, can you hear me? Was new and different. Call it uncharted territory if you want. I think one of the things that we as women sometimes do that I'd hope that we get away from a little bit is this: you have to be asked 15 times before you run. You're not going to make enough money. You're not going to raise enough money, because what that does is it gives preconceived notions about who you are that, unfortunately, in the strategist world, is used against you. And so I think that folks take you lightly when you say that you have so many, obstacles to climb. If you are not courageous about running, if you are not saying to yourself, I'm going to beat the conventional wisdom, I'm going to tear down the stereotypes against me and take the bull by the horn, as Charlotte did. And I have to say that because it's a big move. She told you all the dynamics. The dynamics that made me feel that she was more courageous than most was she was the sole caretaker for her father, who took a turn for the worse. So she had an elderly parent that she was dealing with at the same time. So women do have different dynamics that they have to deal with. But I think if we can get away from what we don't have when we get out here to run, and be as strong as the guys in terms of your focus, that will bode best.
Go ahead,
Joy.
Gloria.
Yeah, we'll just go like, well, I think gender plays a role in a lot of our institutions, and including in our, campaigns. If being the only woman of color in a boardroom full of men might make us, as well, a challenge. And I think one of the things that Charlotte had said that I want to take comfort is that she did have to contemplate and think about where she was at before running, where most of the candidates, the 24, might have just gotten up one day and said, you know what, I could do this, or had been thinking about this and planning. And I think that's a huge challenge for anyone running. If you're thinking, 7 months, you're in your groove at in California, as she mentioned, trying to get funding, from this Republican, and then she's getting these texts. It wasn't in her conscience to even think about that at that moment. So. One of the challenges that I think in overall for any candidate, and particularly women, is that we don't think about it enough, right? We don't plan for that opportunity, for that, that timing, for, that special election that might be coming, and then next thing you know, we have to think about, okay, so how do I manage the house? How do I make sure I have the financial well-being? If I don't have a support system, how do I make sure that my kids are going to get picked up if they have to go to a little league or so forth? Some questions that maybe not might be a question that most men candidates ask. Well, and I think we need to ask that ourselves as women, and particularly women that hopefully more women that would be willing to run, is how do we prepare for that moment? Or if not, why not do it? why not change the culture of the way that we do run campaigns so that it is much more flexible for more women to be running?
So, Gloria Bell, I guess that means that all women that are running for office, we need wives to.
Maybe, or maybe we just need really good men that knows how to be really play those roles.
I did think it was interesting to note that John Connolly's wife, I think she was a psychologist. She just had her third baby, so that's a lot in her hands too. But she talked about how she quit her job or stepped back from her job to be home with the kids, because he certainly wasn't going to be home with the kids while he was running for office. And he spoke about how what he's going to do now is make up a little time at home with the kids. So that's a big issue. And your kids are older, but still you've got the father. And many times it would be the wife with the father-in-law, that would step in to take over. I mean, it's constant. You're absolutely right. It's a constant thing. What about the money, you guys, down at the end, of the money for a woman? I mean, I think it's so hard for women to get money. Preeti, you want to weigh in, and Paul after?
I can jump in on the money piece, but I also, wanted to sort of take a step back and answer your earlier question also about how the impact of Charlotte being a woman and a woman of color. And I think the very fact that she was a woman and a woman of color running had a huge impact on this race. By the very fact that she was running, it had an impact both on the money, on the way people perceiving her, on the way the voters were voting for her, on the expectations and the standards that she was held to as a candidate. And as I think about this, I've resonated and sort of thought about this race and so many others that I've worked on over the years, and I just keep coming back to the fact that I think in some ways I have the strangest job in America, because I'm the only person that wakes up every morning and prays to God that my job is no longer needed in the world, because I work to get women elected to office, and I am just waiting and dying for the day that we are just running en masse and we are running in record numbers, and it just doesn't matter anymore. I'm sick and tired of the firsts, and I'm sick and tired of the seconds, and we just got to be breaking that ceiling. We got to be running. I'm sorry, I'm taking this in a different direction, but I'm fed up, guys. I'm just sick and tired of this. I can't take it anymore. I'm losing my mind. But it's the Catherines and the Mimis and the Suzannes and the Lindas and the Charlottes that run, and somebody has to be the first every time so that they make it easier for the second and the third. And Charlotte, as I think about your race, I think you summed it up that night. I still remember on your victory night you said it so beautifully, I have opened a door and it's up to somebody else to walk through it. And I think that's the legacy of your campaign. I really do believe that. And I feel so strongly that we have to make sure there's another woman to walk through that door.
I think this is all your fault, Paul. You want to?
Yeah. Well, maybe being a guy, I either don't know or I'm naive, but I must say I thought from the beginning that it would be a huge asset that Charlotte was a woman of color, and then her other assets as well. I remember early on when people were asking me, reporters in particular, were asking me who was going to be in the final, and I was saying that I thought, well, I don't know, but the one person I would bet on would be Charlotte Golar Richie. So I thought from the beginning that this would be a huge asset, well, along with their other assets as well, not that alone. And again, clearly I was wrong, maybe naive. And it's been pointed out by Charlotte and others, some of the things, I could just list them, the things that I think worked against her. The funds I did think worked against her. I saw all of the campaign funding reports, and I was waiting for the money to come in, I must say. And I had heard about Emily's List and so forth, and that money was going to be coming in. And I don't know if it ever came in or it came in as expected, but it certainly did not come in early, as Emily's List, the acronym stands for. Secondly, Charlotte did not have a recent political base. I think that hurt her. She was not running from a particular area. Thirdly, I do think multiple candidates of color did hurt Charlotte in the end. And finally, I would say I think the Globe op-ed piece was devastating. I think it had a huge impact. The timing of it couldn't have been worse, as sort of Charlotte's sort of didn't really go after that, but she really was on a bit of a roll. And I remember talking after that to some of the people who had been op-ed editors of the Globe previous, not the current ones, and just asked them if they had remembered an experience in which that close to a campaign they had run a piece such as that. So I think those things and some of the other things I think really did hurt Charlotte.
It was by Larry Harmon, by the
Yes.
way. If anybody wants to Google it, Harmon, I believe is how you spell his name, and check it out. But let's get back to that whole money issue too, because you guys know better than I do. The raising the money is crucial. I mean, many people think that the money is what made the difference. Other people would disagree, but Marty Walsh had a lot more money than John Conley, and that was a factor. I don't know how big of a factor it was, but that's a factor. Women getting money is and Emily's list, frankly, I think sort of let Charlotte down.
Absolutely. Emily's list was as the communications chair for Charlotte's race, was my greatest nightmare. And I'll tell you why. I mean, almost every day I talk to our fundraiser and say, well, can they do independent, things, expenditures? Can they do, we were going down the line. And then I would get calls from reporter friends of mine all over the country and say, well, Emily's list hasn't done a whole lot for black women, Joyce. And I'd say, look, can't do that women thing because we don't want to split women between black and white. And then folks will call me from New York and say, they're putting a whole lot of money behind, I forget the woman. Christine Quinn, and she's going down. They're finding a way to help her. And all the while, we had to do the dance that Charlotte mentioned a little bit about, and that is that I do believe that women of all stripes need to find a way to come together despite some differences. And I think that, folks were on one end afraid to say Emily's list isn't doing anything for fear that some of the white women in the campaign who hold Emily's list as the Bible might say, oh, it was just a horrible experience. And in the end, they gave $500, and I think that they get, and they had to open up a PAC here to do it. And it was just, pretty tumultuous to try to deal with politically.
How much they give to Quinn? Do you know? Do you know how much they gave to Christina Quinn?
One friend of mine told me about $200,000 or more.
So.
Okay, so, Emily's list, and we said, look, can you work the New England folks? All of that. We had heavy-duty women who worked for women's rights calling, putting pressure on Zero. They did a wonderful op-ed piece, but that didn't help us at all. And every single filing, the press would call me and say, when's the Emily's list money coming in? And that was a very agonizing situation to deal with.
So do you think this had to do with, you're implying this had to do with the race thing, that they're much more generous with white women candidates than with women of color?
Well, this is what, a friend said to me. They said, Joyce, I've never heard of them supporting a woman candidate of color.
Wow.
Who have they supported?
I wonder what you guys think, and Charlotte, feel free to weigh in here too, but there was a lot of talk about the candidates of color sort of banding together. There was a big controversy in the middle of the campaign where there was some meeting that went on and people were talking about this, and it was treated as if it was almost some outrageous thing, but frankly, lots of people have done this in other races and got together and said, we're for women, or well, I think it's mostly, frankly, been 4 black guys, 3 black women, and 1. It's been a color thing that's gone on before. So it wasn't crazy, really, to have done that. But it didn't. Behind the scenes, I think is the way it's usually done. So people don't know about it till after the race. But it's not uncommon. In retrospect, do you think that maybe we were all a little bit too judgmental about doing something like that?
No, I think that the community and the press were sort of divided on this a little bit. Should everybody be allowed to run? It's a free world. We all have a right to be in the race. And then the other about trying to coalesce, come together behind one particular candidate. Now, this is where you kind of, as a woman, I think, and for myself, I'll say my personal experiences, sort of feel a little bit being a woman in the field. Because can I tell these guys? Can I really do that?
Yeah.
To say, hey guys, I'm here, okay? And how are they going to take it? Are they going to say, and who does Charlotte think she is? Or is she going, oh yes, no, Charlotte, she's got track record, she's been at this a long time. No, I mean, I came in after, so I was a little, we acknowledge, right?
Right.
I get in after they do.
Right.
And I'm going to tell them, okay, step aside, boys. I got this one. I just don't think, it doesn't happen like that.
No.
So my view was that this was a challenge, and I was going to win in spite of the fact that the guys were in it. I was going to win. I do feel that I still could have won this thing. And unfortunately, I don't get a do-over, but I really did. I got in there with my eyes open, believing that I could win this race, even with the because remember, there were 23 other candidates that all were looking to get on the ballot when in the first cut, remember?
Right.
And then in June or whenever they certify the signatures, that's when we found out that it was a dozen. So we did pretty well getting that list down.
You know, I'm one to say that I think the multiple candidates of color just, whether it was a good idea or a bad idea, I think it clearly hurt Charlotte. I mean, the fact is that if you look at roughly half of Barros's vote, half of Arroyo's vote, and possibly even Clemens' vote, if that went to Charlotte, she would have been in the final. And again, I'm not arguing whether it's a good idea or a bad idea to have strategized along that, but at least in the final results, there's no question, I think, that having multiple candidates of color hurt. Now, maybe that's a legitimate thing, but I just think that the numbers would say that.
Preeti?
Oh, that's a difficult line to walk, isn't it? Because how do you tell people not to vote when I stand here every day and my job is to tell you to run, right? How do you tell people not to run? How do you really stand there and say, you know, don't run? But I think that there is a strategy here that we do need to talk about as women and as communities of color. There is a strategy piece of it. And my challenge when I think about this personally is the men have been doing it this way for hundreds of years. They pick their guy. They are out there in whatever room, wherever they're having these conversations, picking their guys, and that's how they get these seats. Because they coalesce around their guy, and they've picked him even before that seat is open, and they know what's coming down the line, and we're not necessarily strategizing that way. We're not necessarily coalescing behind women or behind candidates of color in that way. And I think that there is room for that conversation to be happening. We have to somehow start to think ahead. We have to somehow be ahead of the game a little bit to kind of start to get these seats. We need to know where the openings are. We need women in government to help us find out where those openings are. So I think there's a room for that conversation, but I think, how do you really go about tell people not to run? That's a hard line to walk, you know? I definitely think it is.
You got any thoughts on this one, Gloria?
Yeah, I'm going to put it in the context of as a community organizer. Our base gets excited when there are candidates that look like him, that could talk about the issues that are impactful. So in one end, we don't ever have enough candidates of color running. And when we do, our community actually gets excited and they want to come out and vote. And most of the time, communities of color are infrequent or barely vote because at the end of the day, we had 20 years of the same white male candidates running. So what's going to change in my life? So I think, you know, it's really difficult, you know, particular in that, but I do agree one sense that, yeah, you know, we also had a slew of white men candidates running, but they split their votes and they still too came on top, right? So what does that mean for communities of color? Does that mean that we can't win if we don't participate in much more frequently? If we're getting more out and more excited to go out and vote? Do we ultimately have to ban around one candidate in order to win? So I think we have to look at all of those things, particularly as someone that has to take out votes that usually don't want to go out and vote. But I will say that I think Charlotte has the experience, and what didn't happen and could have happened with funding, more time, and maybe coming out earlier is her introducing herself to a broader group of in communities of color that would have gravitated to her but didn't know her, because a lot of these other candidates, you know, I would speak on Felix Arroyo in East Boston. He had been there, he's known there. It's a 53% Latino community, so it was one of those things, but I do think that by her message and her getting to know each other, that more voters would have gravitated.
Well, I kind of disagree a little bit on that.
Okay.
I think Charlotte lost because the turnout was so dismal in her base. It was 30% citywide, but in communities of color, it was 13%. Charlotte was right. Whoever ran, she could have won if more people came out to vote in her base. No doubt about it. She got double the votes of either one of the two men candidates of color. She beat 3 big bank guys who raised $1 million more to get into 3rd place. She came within 3,500 of being in the final. If the 20% that we targeted, that we hoped had come out, she would be one of the ones in the final. But 13%, I went home and cried. I was 13% in a mayoral race. So even if she had other candidates of color, she beat them all, okay, with no doubt, and several of the white candidates. What we don't realize here is because votes and the casting of votes in communities of color are so iffy. I mean, we can't go to the polls and say, like, we know South Boston's gonna vote, we know West Roxbury's gonna vote. The votes in communities of color are iffy. There's a lot of reasons. Disenchantment could be one of them, you know, just like too many candidates to try to figure out, waiting until the final, a whole host of things. Charlotte lost because her base did not come out. That's the long and the short of it. Because our numbers were, if they came at 20%, she would have been one of the people in the primary, in the preliminary. And we were dashed when we saw 13%. Unbelievable. 30% citywide, unbelievable, but 13% in her base, just outrageous.
Well, that's a big issue. I mean, you're in East Boston, Gloria Bell, which came out huge with this casino vote over there because people were very passionate about that. So how do you do it? Because you hear that all the time, that, you know, you mentioned South Boston, Joyce, a lot of nice parks in South Boston because a lot of people come out and vote for their city councilor, and they're on the back of their district city councilor, the city councilor statewide. How do you combat that? What do you do? Pretty, you got any ideas down there?
Jeez, we got a lot of
Wow, you gave me the hard one.
What do we do?
What do you do? How do you change that?
Look,
because
I
I
mean,
think it matters hugely in what you get as a citizen.
Definitely it matters. And I think for you know, let's use East Boston. I mean, in some areas where one of our highest, you know, Latino precincts, the Maverick Square area, they've been participating for the past 4 years, and their numbers have been increasing in participation. But that doesn't happen magically, because people don't show up to vote, because at the end of the day, most folks, average voters, you know, attention span is like this, and particularly in our communities, low-income, you know, communities of color, at least the community that I mostly identify, you know, their challenges are everyday. You know, what am I gonna, you know, feed my kids, or where am I gonna get work? But the casino issue, which was one of the issues that was huge there, kind of galvanized, and it also helped that we had 5 candidates, including Charlotte, to open an office there. So these voters were getting contacted to a point where they were like, you know, we do nonpartisan work at Nube, that they were like, can you guys just stop calling us? Can you guys please just leave us alone? I was like, no, but it's not us, you know, but it helps. Because the more saturation, the more times we're talking to them, the more it's like, you know what, let me go do this, whether they believe or not. And then if we look at the blanks of city council at large, there was a lot of blanks, over like 1,300 blanks in some of these precincts. That means they didn't know about half of the candidates. So I think we need to continuously engage. We have to have messages, and we have to have more candidates that are reflective of the communities that we serve. Because they're going to be able to speak about the experiences, the issues, and be able to get to these voters that might have checked out and been checked out for years.
Yeah,
Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
I do agree with that, and I think it's really about having really strong get out the vote operations and voter ID operations on each campaign as well. But I have to say, I think there is a tremendous amount of voter fatigue in the state. I think we have to acknowledge that. Like, I have worked on so many campaigns, I am tired of knocking on doors and making phone calls. I cannot imagine what people are thinking on the other end of the phone. I think at one point I actually counted, I think I knocked the same doors almost 6 times this year for different candidates over the course of the year. So I think this year was also a little bit unique, and we do have to acknowledge that, because we were out there and we were calling, we were getting the message out, and the number of times I heard from people like, just please stop calling us. We don't want to hear anymore. We're just tired of elections, and it's been a really rough year in that sense. So I think that was a particular challenge this year that really came up. I saw it on Charlotte's race and many others that we worked on throughout the year as well.
Paul?
I just want to say something just back on the candidates of color issue, which I think is absolutely really critical. You know, part of the narrative of this campaign was making history, and one way to make history was to elect a person of color. The other way to make history is to elect a woman. And from my point of view, I always thought that the best way to make history in the first instance, that is elect a person of color was Charlotte Golar Richie. And that happened to be a way to make history in the second case, that is a woman. It's like people were afraid to make double history here. We didn't want to go too far. And that's what, in my view, and it's a strategic analysis, I guess. I don't want to show what my colors were in terms of who I might have supported or not, but my belief is that if you wanted to make history, if you just cared about getting the first person of color in there, Charlotte Golar Richie's candidacy made sense to me. And at the same time, you could make real history, and that person happened to be the woman candidate of color. That's why I think the whole issue about making history and Charlotte's unique position was absolutely critical in this race. And I think actually it could have, and part of the reason why I think Charlotte was the best candidate to make history in the first case is precisely because I thought Charlotte could draw, at least from across the city and various different constituencies. That's why I would say that was in that particular position. And I'm not sure people sort of grasp that. The New York Times called me on election day and they said, wow, we got 2 white Irish guys. And I'm like duh. Like, you know, they were saying like, this is real news. I said, this is the narrative of the campaign. That's what we're gonna get if we don't wake up and try to elect a person of color. And it's like people just discovered this.
You know, we just have a few minutes before we take some questions, so I wanted to get to the city council race in Boston. We mentioned it before. Ayanna Pressley topping the ticket, who's been obviously a very, very popular city councilor all across Boston, at-large councilor, and then Michelle Wu, this young 28-year-old woman who came out of nowhere and came in second. So, Charlotte, start with you. What do you make of that? I mean, people came out and voted for these 2 women. One of them had been a virtual unknown.
Well, the virtual unknown. I don't know about that, but no. Well, in the sense that she did some serious work for Elizabeth Warren. So
yep.
That's kind of how we got to know her. She had a really great, she had a picture-perfect campaign.
Yeah.
She did, and I did look at her. I will say that being out there in the field, running into Ayanna, running into Michelle and Suzanne and Mimi and all of that, that's actually a good thing to help women in terms of an opportunity, opening doors and everything. We need to all get out there at the same time. I think that's a good thing. It's sort of like retail or restaurants. You want to have clusters of businesses or something. Okay, that's a little bit off point. But my point there is to say that it doesn't take away having Ayanna and Michelle running and being the top vote getters. I think it enhanced my prospects. Why? Because a lot of the people who would come out to vote for them, to vote for Suzanne, to vote for Mimi, to vote for Catherine, are going to be voting for Charlotte. And so I benefited from them running in the race.
Anybody else want to weigh in on the city council race?
Well, I think it's pretty historic to have 2 women of color. I remember, my 5 trips with Ayanna saying, run, run, run. Michelle had a wonderful story, and I think that it's great to have 2 women of color at the top of the council. I just think that there are other doors to be opened, and I'd like to, in my lifetime, see a woman of color mayor or woman mayor, governor. And for some reason, I feel like it's laden with obstacles still. And I'm not quite sure why. have some ideas, but again, like I said, I don't want to throw things out so that it's like a victim mentality. But I do think that we have real work to do to support other women, and I do believe that women of all colors have to support women better. I have to say that, just from my experience.
I was just going to piggyback real fast, if I can cheat a little bit to get in here, just to say this, because I wouldn't want to end this wonderful session with a feeling that is one of discouragement. You know, I think, so I wouldn't want women to say, gosh, Charlotte had these qualifications, she had, you know, a lot of things going for her, and she couldn't win this thing. So I wouldn't want that to come out of it. I would want us to believe that, to Preeti's point, which is my earlier point, I guess, is that we have opened a door. And we're opening doors. That's what we're doing. That's what this is about. And sometimes you get the win, and sometimes you don't. But this hopefully will make it easier because we understand what's at stake. We understand what this entails. And we want women to get out there and keep trying.
Okay, I've been instructed we are supposed to go to the open mic now, and just slip me a note. So we're going to go to the open mic, which I guess means we're going to take questions. And am I calling on the question? Oh, no. Okay. We have our question taker out there in the audience.
Hi, thank you so much for this panel. It's a blast for the past for me, because I ran for office in Boston almost 20 years ago, and I was very active in the Women's Political Caucus. But my question is about timing. And I was watching your race, and I was really concerned about the fact that the primary is so early. I've worked for progressives, I've worked for women of color, and for women, and that September primary date, it's like people aren't ready yet. They're just not there, and it's so hard to get people out. Is there any way that can be changed?
And it was later, I think, this year than it usually is. I think it was later. It was like a week later. I mean, yeah, no, people came back for Labor Day is really when it felt like I said, the campaign hit high gear, right?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You know, just one quick thing. I know we have election fatigue, but it does drive me a little bit crazy that people can binge watch Breaking Bad, and they can watch, you know, Housewives of Beverly Hills and all these shows, and they say, well, I really can't get myself to the polls. And you just say to yourself, Gene Rivers, you know Gene Rivers, the Reverend Gene Rivers, we had him on the radio, and my God, he hadn't voted. And I said, when was the last time you voted? He said, well, I don't remember. And I thought, that's because you haven't voted. I mean, it was unbelievable. He's an activist in the community. He hasn't voted. I have friends of mine that say, well, you know, I'm busy. I don't know who's running. And you think, it's a cliche, but you get what you vote for. And if you don't pay attention, you're not going to get anywhere. And I mean, sometimes it gets confusing when you're voting for governor's council and stuff like that. But I mean, you know, for mayor, get your rear end out there to the polls, it seems to me anyway. Sorry for my little diatribe.
I agree. We need to stop accepting excuses for people not voting. But I want to say this is kind of like a roast. And I don't have any jokes or any thing to say about the mayoral election, but in that regard. But I do want to raise still, I think the point that Professor Watanabe made about coalescing and winning elections on a great opportunity is an important point, because I do want to say that I thought that it wasn't an either or, like one person of color running and the rest not running. It's about what we ran for and how do we win. And I've been in I've worked for a long time on civil rights and getting power in the city. And this for me was really a bittersweet time, because it was an opportunity of a generation, and I'm probably not going to see it in my political activism again. there's a silver lining, but what I wanted to say is I kept thinking if we had those bright young men running for city council citywide, and Charlotte running, and Suzanne Lee running, and Michelle Wu running, and Ayanna Presley running, and progressives running together supporting that, we would be in power in the city of Boston today, and we're not. So that's my bittersweet part, but I'm glad all those people are there because they do have a bright future. So that's all, I just had a comment.
I'm going to make the rounds here. I know this is such an exciting event. Everyone has questions.
Hi. I just wanted to ask the women on the panel and the women in the room that have run with the wolves. Charlotte, you touched upon it and nobody really had brought it up, but you had mentioned, and it seems to me, and forgive me, I'm colorblind, I don't see any black, Hispanic, anything on the women panel here. I just see women. And my question to you is, you've had the experience, we all are familiar with the Old Boy Network, and we all know that, you know, men rally and they pick their candidates, et cetera, which you've mentioned. What is it that you think prevents an old girl network? Charlotte, you mentioned that you were surprised that women didn't get together and rally behind you. Is there one particular thing that you think that women don't bond or don't come together in order to put us through that glass ceiling, to break open the door?
So this is kind of, you know, will I really ever know the answer to that, right? But I did feel there was a sense I got that there was some fear out there. And that was an interesting one. I know that people say things like jealousy, this and that, whatever, but I think there was a fear, and that is something that we need to think about. Maybe that's something Anna and Barbara, the fear of winning. We're so used to losing and being out of power that the prospect of being in control might have been scarier than anything else. And I wondered about that. And I guess I was hoping that I could convince people to sort of lessen that feeling of fear by convincing people and sharing with them that I had the wherewithal in terms of my skill set and, you know, abilities and experience, all that stuff, that would have helped sort of instill or whatever, you know, some confidence in me and in the ability that I thought I had to lead. But I wondered about that. I did.
I sort of felt there was a kind of a caste system where a lot of powerful women were ignoring the municipal races and focusing more on the congressional races. That's where attention was. And I find that a little disheartening because the municipal races are the races that are closest to the people for services and that kind of thing. But I felt that there was more of a trend toward getting more women elected to congressional seats than at this time than there was on the municipal race. And it felt to me a little like a caste system.
Oh, hi, beautiful people. Thank you so much for being here. And my question will be to this lady, Miss Egan. What is the effect of that news does into any women candidate? I am looking forward very close in the near future to see a woman president of the United States, never mind a mayor. And also, I support this lady, Pretty, here, because she said something that is quite true. We women have to get together. We have to forget that I am Spanish, that I am French, that I'm black, that I live here. Oh, I live in Arlington. No, I live in Brookline. Never mind. If we are gonna get someone there to represent us, we have to be more objective about it. We have to think who we can help, how we can get the money, how we can get her there. We have to remember the men at this point. Look at the mess in Washington, D.C. Look at the mess in Washington, D.C. We do need to have more of us women, not only in Boston. We have to have women in all over the United States to support us women, because we are always the little handicapped child here. We don't have support, we don't have the money, we have the problems, we have the situation. Children don't have to be like this. If a man, like this lady Pretty say, she say, if men is gonna get there, they have 5 years already in the road that they have get the money, the people, the group, and everyone else to do something about it. Why we women cannot do the same thing?
Okay.
Thank you.
So, was your question, what does the news media got to do with, how does the news media impact women getting elected? Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I know that you see Hillary Clinton, when she ran for president, you know, you saw it from Chris Matthews, a liberal guy on MSNBC, talking about her, remember when he was talking about her cankles?
And her pants.
Yeah, I mean, it was unbelievably. I was stunned when and then you have the left, the right, you know, Rush Limbaugh wondering if America was ready to watch a woman get old. So I think there's a lot of sexism from the media. But I don't know. You know, I think that we are the majority. Women are the majority in the United States of America. We're the majority voters. I would hope that we would be able to overlook those kinds of things. But I think, is there sexism? Absolutely. I mean, I think that when you mentioned before, Charles Yancey is a city councilor, and he's a great guy. I've known him for years, and but he ran as a city councilor for mayor while he was running for city councilor. Now, I can tell you this, in terms of sexism, if you had been running for a city councilor, and you couldn't have gotten away with that. No. And I don't think many people thought Charles Yancey was going to win, but still, he would have been, if that were a woman, it would have been, you just can't do it. So I think that it's still what Gloria Steinem said, you know, 70 years ago, or 70 years ago, in the 70s, I should say, that you got to work twice as hard and be twice as talented and smart. I think that's still, unfortunately, true. But I don't know how much impact we have. I'm sorry, that's not a very good answer.
Hi, I have 2 comments. One was in the beginning you were saying how guys just know they want to run and they're going to do that. And case in point, you know, about 5 or 6 years ago, I was at an event and somebody says, oh, I just want you to meet, I guess I'll say his name, Michael Flaherty. You know, he's going to be the next mayor of Boston. So, no, but this was 5, 6 years ago. So that was already being planned. And something was very similarly said about one of the candidates that ran in this race, in your race, to me 3 years ago. This is so-and-so. You know, he's going to be the next mayor of Boston. You know, so they have been thinking about it for a long time, and they are looking down the road. And, you know, things change. You can't be certain, but you know, they had their eye on that ball, and women don't necessarily, because they're usually doing the work that they were elected to do, or the job they were elected to do, and they're not thinking about all of these things and going to that. My question is, you seemed, when we talked about the women's vote, and you said you had different lessons learned, do you feel that you called out that women's vote enough? Did you let yourself be identified as the woman and ask for that sisterhood, which isn't always there, I agree. There's sometimes men that come up that are much more embracing of your candidacy than a woman will be. But I do find that when women really do try to focus on that, it can rally. Do you feel that you did that enough, or would you go back?
I mean, I absolutely didn't. If you think about it, I shared with you that this was a 5-month campaign. 3 months were really the campaign, right? There was a startup, so it's like a business, starting up a business, right? I had to get on the ballot. So I decided I was going to run end of April. May was all about getting signatures to get on the ballot, and it was June, July, and August, and September, okay. So maybe 3.5 months, I was able to get out there with limited resources. If I had some people have been saying, wow, Charlotte, I love the commercial you did for Marty Walsh, sorry, Houston Flaherty. Marty Walsh, my candidate, Marty Walsh. I was thinking if I could have done that commercial for my own campaign, right? So I was not able to maximize or raise sufficient resources, maximize those resources, leverage them, whatever, to be able to get out to all of the potential voters there. Still, I think that right.
Margie, can I just say something to the first part of her comment?
Sure.
And that is this notion, I know it's true that the notion that men plan forever and so forth, but I think of 4 words from Martin Luther King, why we can't wait. And the point is that if one is sort of burdened by the notion that they can't jump in without all of the preparation and have all of it, and look at the successes. Elizabeth Warren did not wait. She had never run for office before. She got elected. Barack Obama was in the middle of his first term as a senator. He was a state rep, and he ran. Look at Deval Patrick, never ran for elected office before. Michelle Wu. The notion is that you can win if you, in fact, you've got to. You can't follow the course of men if you want to win. And if you've got to we look too much at what the experiences of people who have lost, and we should. But we should also look at the experience of people who have won. And if you look at them, they are people who did not wait.
Very true.
We got one last question.
Hi. Charlotte, I was so glad you said you didn't want this wonderful forum to end on a downer. And I wanted to say I came to this forum because I was so excited about what's just happened. I was thrilled that there were all these candidates that jumped in there. And so there's one thing I want to say is that it's almost like we're talking about what happened without a sort of looking at the wider context. I don't think it's at all unusual that you would not have seen much political activity when you had somebody in the role of mayor who'd been there as long as Mayor Menino. So what was exciting about this was, one, he announced that he wasn't going to run fairly late, and then this surge of interest and activity of all of these candidates. So I thought that was a good thing. I don't at all look at the fact that you didn't win as a loss. I see ahead of us a level of political activity and activism and possibility for this city that I've never seen here in my lifetime. So I'm excited about it. I'm excited about what you're going to do next. I'm excited, and the other thing that you can hear through this is whether or not you win a public office, and I think a liability that everybody was facing was lack of name recognition. I mean, there were so many candidates. So what we have the opportunity to do, so whether or not you win that office, political activity, a life of public service, getting known in the city is what now we have in the next 4 years. If women can start to get active in political life, we have an opportunity to build something that we actually didn't have the opportunity for now. So I'm agreeing also with what Paul said. I think we should be building the money. I don't think we should be waiting around for Emily's List as if that's the only money in town. I think we should be grooming people to get involved in all kinds of roles in politics. I think we should, and through that activity, I think we should be defining an agenda for change that really gets people excited. I love what Gloria Bell said. People will turn out, that poor turnout, people will turn out when there's something they care about. I think the road ahead for us is nothing but exciting as long as we stay engaged and actually start to, you used the word, you said to run, we need systems of support. So we need to start building the system, the pipeline of leadership, the systems of support, the money, the people who are excited about it. I think it's all exciting ahead, and stay active.
Well done. I know.
Okay, in just a second, Barbara Lewis is going to come up here for some closing remarks, but I wanted to thank everybody for coming tonight. I want to thank Anne for all her hard work and her persistent emails to get all these scripts right. I wanted to thank Charlotte Golar Richie, who did a fantastic job and represented, I think, the city very well running for mayor. Joyce Farabelle, Laura Bell, Preeti, Paul Wananabe. I also want to thank you guys for all coming tonight, the CWPPP and the Trotter Institute for organizing this event. And now I'd like to introduce Barbara Lewis, Director of the Trotter Institute for the Study of Black History and Culture, who will provide some closing remarks.
Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure and an honor to talk with you. It was also very, very exciting to be in this room and feel all this great energy. I certainly have a task ahead of me, and that is to bring a few things together. And one of the panelists, I can't remember which one, talked about changing the culture. And for me, in listening to what everyone had to say and also listening to the questions and comments from the audience, I think what we saw is not just changing the culture, but an unearthing and a revealing of the culture. Marjorie Egan started off and she talked about how there's this dichotomy here in Boston. We have one face, this public face, but we also have a private face. And the private face is at odds with the public face. And I think in this run that happened, we saw both those faces. And I think it's wonderful that that other face came to the fore too. Because until we find a way to reconcile those faces, we are not going to move forward. But Charlotte, in getting out and running, she made us see ourselves. She made us see this city, who we are and who we can be. She brought race to the fore. I think sometimes in Boston we're afraid to talk about race, but she put it front and center, and that's an extraordinary gift. She gave us a challenge. We have to be more honest about race in this city because it does matter. It matters fundamentally. She brought gender to the fore, and that matters as well. I look out and I see in this audience, I see a predominance of women. That's exciting, but that's also, in a way, just a little bit disturbing. I would like to see more men. I would like to see more men supporting us, standing up with us and for us. And I would also like to see the women who are here, the brown women, the yellow women, the black women, working more together. Sometimes we don't do that. We work together, or we say we work together in public, but in private, sometimes we pull away from each other. We need to get beyond that. And with Charlotte running, as I said, she put gender right out in front in our faces, and so those are some of the things that we have to pay attention to and make sure that we are correcting personally. She woke us up. We needed to be awakened, and it's great to be alive and awake because as you start to get older, as I am, you realize that time is extraordinarily precious. And you need to do as much as you possibly can with every minute. And so being awake is crucial. She also, or certainly the things around her, the whole swirl of energy and the revelations, revealed to us how afraid we can be. There was talk about how, we might be afraid of winning. We might be so in love with the status that we have now a status, unfortunately, that's highly connected to loss, that we don't want to generate the energy to, hey, we don't have your stamina. We all need to do a little Zumba and a little yoga and be able to get in those parades and march and climb those stairs and make that difference, because that's what it takes. It takes that stamina, and that stamina is not always easy. She made us see that progressive label that we wear here in Boston, that we need to do a lot more to deserve it. We need to be much more unified here. We need to get past all of our parochial differences, all of our cultural differences, all of our historic differences, all of our resentments. If we really want to be that world-class city that we know we can be, then we have to do some homework. We have to do some housework. And I say that here we are, standing on the edge of a new time, the edge of a new era, the edge of a point when women are going to have more power, just by numbers, just by the fact that we're out there and we're doing it. And we can do more, and we will do more, and we will make changes, and we will strategize. We will build our systems of support and our networking, and we will go forward. And I think, or at least I hope, that Charlotte will run again. I was also told that I should talk about some lessons and some tasks that we might take on moving forward. I'm not going to say much that's new. I'm going to reiterate the importance of strategizing. We have to come together. We have to work together. We have to build and strengthen our networks. We have to focus on getting ahead of the game. We need to chart the game, see what are those crucial moments, those points of change. What are we going to do at those different points? What are those challenges going to be, and how are we going to meet them? We have to get past the apathy. There was a lot of talk about that. And we have to face the fear, because we're all afraid. It's not easy to change. But Boston has this magnificent history, and it can have an even more magnificent future. And the only way that can happen is if we work together. Thank you.